In the quiet shadows of history, there are stories that still breathe, still echo, still tremble with the footsteps of those who lived them. And tonight, as we open the pages of a world reshaped by fire, steel, and courage, stay with this journey until the end. Every moment reveals a truth buried beneath the mud. Every word carries the heartbeat of men who stood in a storm the world had never seen before. As we walk through these memories, we honor those who faced the unthinkable and left behind lessons that still whisper to us across a century. This is the world of a war that swallowed nations and changed everything. In 1914, Europe was a continent standing on the edge of a blade. For decades, countries had been building alliances and stockpiling weapons, each one watching the other through narrowed eyes. The assassination of one archduke was all it took to unleash a tide no one could stop. Within weeks, armies mobilized like machines awakening from sleep. Flags were raised, drums rolled, and young men farmers, factory workers, students were swept into uniforms. Some marched with pride, others with fear hidden behind forced smiles. They believed the war would last weeks. No one imagined 4 years of endless thunder. When those armies first collided, the ground shook with a violence humanity had never known. Lines of soldiers advanced on open fields, only to be cut down by machine guns that spat hundreds of bullets a minute. Horses panicked under the sound of artillery. Forests burned, rivers filled with debris, and villages vanished beneath fire and smoke. In the chaos of these first battles, soldiers realized that war was no longer the old world as duelit, was an industrial storm designed to crush bodies and spirits alike. As months passed, the battlefield transformed into a frozen line stretching from the North Sea to the Alps. Trenches were dug, twisting, narrow scars where men lived, fought, and died. Rain soaked everything. Boots rotted. Rats fed on the dead. The smell of damp earth mixed with sweat, gunpowder, and the unmistakable scent of death that clung to every coat and blanket. Men slept sitting up, rifles pressed to their chests, dreaming of home in brief moments before a shell shook the ground again. Life in the trenches was a test of endurance that few outside could imagine. Days blurred together. Mud swallowed entire boots. Lice crawled beneath uniforms until skin blistered. Letters from home brought warmth, but also pain reminders of lives paused. Families waiting, futures uncertain. Soldiers shared whatever they had. A dry piece of bread, a cigarette passed around, a joke whispered to distract from the terror creeping through the darkness. In those moments, friendships were formed stronger than steel. A man would give his last drop of water to the comrade beside him because survival was not just a battle, it was a bond. The battlefield was not always noise and chaos. Sometimes, silence was worse. A quiet night meant fear of what was coming. Snipers could strike without warning. Gas attacks drifted silently, a pale green cloud that turned lungs into fire. Soldiers learned to sleep with gas masks near their heads, their fingers always ready to grasp them. Many prayed that the wind would be kind. Yet even amid all this suffering, moments of humanity shone like brief sparks in the darkness. On Christmas Eve of 1914, something unexpected happened. Across certain parts of the front, singing floated through the frosty air. Men on both sides lifted their heads, listening, unsure. Lanterns were raised. Hands waved. Slowly, cautiously, soldiers stepped out of their trenches. They exchanged greetings, laughter, chocolate, even photographs. A football was kicked, and for a few hours, enemies became boys again. But dawn came, officers gave orders, and the metal storm returned. Still, that night remained a reminder that even in war, humanity refuses to die. As the war dragged on, technology evolved with terrifying speed. Tanks rolled across the battlefield, their engines roaring like beasts from another world. Airplanes soared above, pilots dueling only meters apart, trusting their skill and luck to save them from fatal dives. Submarines lurked beneath ocean waves, waiting to strike ships that never saw their killers. Every new machine changed the rules, forcing soldiers to adapt or perish. Alongside machines, the human stories continued quiet, powerful tales lost to history's noise. A British soldier carried his wounded officer for 2 days through enemy territory, refusing to abandon him. A German nurse risked her life to treat wounded prisoners, believing pain had no nationality. An Italian soldier wrote letters every night to his mother, hiding the truth of the front so she would not worry, even when he knew he might not see morning. A young Australian kept a small notebook filled with jokes to share with his unit, determined to keep their spirits alive, no matter how dark the nights became. By 1917 and 1918, exhaustion weighed on nations like chains. Food ran short, morale broke, and trenches filled with men who had seen too much. But eventually, the tide shifted. Reinforcements arrived. New strategies emerged. Empire after empire began to crumble under the strain. The final offensives shook the world with their ferocity, each side desperate for an end. Soldiers fought not for glory, but for survival, for the chance to see home again, for the hope that this storm would finally stop. On November 11th, 1918, the guns grew quiet. No cheering, no celebrations scoosed. A heavy silence spreading across the front. Men looked at one another unsure, as if afraid the silence was a trick. They stood in the trenches, listening to a world that had forgotten how to be quiet. And slowly, realization settled in. The war was over, but the cost would echo for generations. When soldiers returned home, they were not the boys who had marched away. Some carried physical wounds that changed their lives. Others carried memories heavier than any uniform. The world they returned to was different. Families altered. Cities changed. Nations reshaped. Some heroes had no graves. Others had no words for what they had witnessed. But every one of them had left a mark on history, a reminder of what it means to endure, to sacrifice, to hold on to humanity even when surrounded by darkness. And as this journey through the storm comes to its end, remember that the voices of those who lived this war still echo through letters, diaries, fields, and ruins. By listening to their stories, by keeping their memories alive, you honor their courage. If you've stayed with this story until now, you have kept their footsteps alive for one more moment in time. And that is how history continues, not in monuments or medals, but in memory and understanding, and in the simple act of never forgetting what they endured.